Mr. Standing, why did you wrote the book, The Prekariat, a New Dangerous Class?
I'd been working on these issues for about 25 years, and I'd written a book called Work After Globalization. And it was about the need to reconceptualize what we mean by work. And wherever I was going in the world talking about that particular book, whenever I started to talk about the precariat, people just asked questions, listened, talked about it. And I realized that I had to write a narrative that reached out to people who are not necessarily labor economists, I'm an economist, and who were not necessarily academics, but also reach academics and political people. So that's really what the origin of the book is about. And I think that the interest that the book has generated reflects the fact that we are in a period of profound transformation globally, and the issues around the precariat have a resonance all over the world.
So then, what are the characteristics of precariat, and why is it a dangerous class?
Well, that's two big questions. The first one can be answered only by understanding globalization. And globalization literally meant liberalizing all our economies to become a global market system. And as a result of that, we've seen the emergence of a globalized class system, a structure which is quite different from any preceding national class structure. At the top you have a plutocracy, a tiny number of abysmally affluent and powerful people. They talk about 119 Swedes owning 40% of national income. In some countries it's even a smaller number. Then you have an elite, below them a salariat, people who've got employment security and all the trappings of salaried, secure life. And below them you have the old proletariat, the working class, if you like, which are disappearing all over the world. They're no longer the future, but the welfare states were built for that class. And below the old proletariat is this growing precariat, and below the precariat is an underclass, a lumpen precariat. And you can define the precariat in terms of three features. The first feature is they have distinctive relations of production. That means they have particular forms of labor: insecure, temporary, casual, part-time, outsourced, and things like that. And you know, all of those things that we know about now, there's a lot of literature on that. For me, that's not the most important feature of the precariat, but it is part of it. More important, you have to realize that people in the precariat don't have any occupational narrative to give their lives. They're not becoming something that they can feel that they regard with pride, that they can sign with a visa or anything like that. They don't have any occupational security. But then the second feature of the precariat is that they have distinctive relations of distribution, that's how I put it, which sounds very complex, but basically it means that they have to rely on money wages. They don't have access to enterprise benefits, non-wage benefits like pensions or paid holidays or medical leave or maternity or paternity leave often, okay? And they don't have access to secure state benefits. You know, if I'd been talking to you 20 years ago and I'd said that only 1/3 of the unemployed in Sweden have access to unemployment benefits, you'd have said, no, that's not Sweden. But that is the reality today. But many countries, people don't have access to any state benefits because they've never had a contribution record that's built up, or they've never had security that they get access to those things. So that means that the precariat has to rely mainly on money wages. But money wages are volatile, and they're falling all over the world, all over the rich countries, real wages are falling. And that means that they're facing increasing income insecurity. And along with that, they have a peculiar feature, which is they face a life of uncertainty. Uncertainty in every respect. Uncertain about what they're going to be doing, uncertain about the income, uncertain how they're going to pay off their debts, which increasingly defines being part of the precariat. You're constantly on the edge of unsustainable debt, right? And then you lead to the third feature, which is the one I'm giving increasing attention to because I think people understand it and it hasn't been given the attention it deserves, which is, in English, they are denizens, not citizens. And what this means, and I discuss this in the book, is that people in the precariat have a more limited and more fragile access to rights. To cultural rights, to civil rights, to political rights, to social rights, and to economic rights. All the 5 types of rights, people in the precariat don't have access to them or are losing them. And this makes it a very new phenomenon. We've always had societies in which newcomers, migrants, don't have the full rights of a citizen. But now we're not only having that, but a lot of citizens are losing rights within their own country. And that is an extraordinarily worrying trend. So millions and millions of people, even living in their own society, don't have access to the 5 types of rights. And it is a very distinctive feature. And finally, this is the first class in history where the average level of education is higher than the type of labor they're expected to perform, or they expect to perform. This is something very, very traumatic, because millions of people cannot actually expect realistically to be able to use the skills and education that they've acquired, often expensively, through university and colleges, and it's creating a real status frustration effect. And that is how you can see the precariat emerging. And when I go to Japan, or I go to Australia, or I go to the United States, or to Spain, as I was last week, everybody knows the precariat is growing in those countries, and it's growing wherever you visit and wherever I see discussions taking place. It's a global phenomenon.
Right. You said, I think in the book, that the precariat is a class in the making. Mm-hmm. How exactly do you mean, and what are the driving forces behind this?
Well, I think you need to make the distinction, which I try to make in the book, between a class in the making and a class for itself. A class in the making is when it consists of huge numbers of people who have similar circumstances, similar insecurities, similar problems that they face, similar relations to the state and relations to other groups in society. But they may not have a similar consciousness of what to do about it, of a transformation that they can say, we must go in that direction. When a class in the making becomes a class for itself, a sufficiently large part of it says, we know what we need to do. So there's a shift in thinking. And you're right, still, a moment is a class in the making, because different elements inside the precariat have a different perspective on what challenges they're facing and what solutions they think are appropriate.
So how do you make a class? If it's a class in the making now, how does it become a class? I mean, how important is class identification and connectedness? I mean, people need the identification, is it necessary to have this
I think
struggle? Or?
Oh, I think it is. And one of the features we can see looking back in history when other classes have emerged, and don't forget they didn't exist at some stage beforehand, is that various stages take place. Often those stages aren't recognizable until afterwards. But in the case of the precariat, I think you can see very clearly what has been happening. The first phase is for a sense of recognition. And I think what happened in 2011, in particular, pushed forward that sense of recognition, that sense of identity. For a long time, people in the precariat were being told to blame themselves for their failures, and they did blame themselves. They felt, well, why am I a failure, and so on. And what happened in 2011 with the Occupy movements, and then the Indignados, and the Den Plerono movement in Greece, and various other movements that emerged, was suddenly people could look in the mirror in the morning and say, it's not me. It's not me that's a failure. It's a system where millions of people are like me, and we're experiencing the same experiences and the insecurities. And it's a structure, a system that is producing me and millions like me. And I'm not prepared to put up with it. And I don't think I should be blaming myself. I think this is a system that is producing this precariat growth, and I'm part of it. And I think that that sense of recognition is a very important phase for moving to the next part of the emergence of a class for itself. Because only when enough people say to themselves and say to their friends and their relatives, I'm part of the precariat, only when that comes do you have the possibility of everybody getting together, or a large number of people getting together to try and make changes. And I think what we've seen in the last 2 or 3 years is that phase rushing forward. And that's necessary. It's great, because now there's a lot of insecurity, there's a lot of anger, there's a lot of sense of anomic detachment from what's going on in society, but there's also an energy of people saying, we must do something. Only when you identify yourself as part of a group can you start to think, okay, what do we do? And we're in that phase at the moment.
What about the old working class as a concept? Is it obsolete?
Well, I've had this argument with Marxists of a certain persuasion who've said, look, the conceptualizing of a precariat is somehow betraying the concept of a unified working class. Well, I don't think we have a unified working class. And whatever one might like, whenever one would like a unified working class of some sort, I think the exciting part of the precariat is that the agenda, the aspirations of a large part of the precariat are quite different from the aspirations of the old working class, say 100 years ago or 50 years ago, which is not to say that that was not progressive at the time. It was progressive at the time. But now your precariat is looking for a different type of good society. And it doesn't look back to stable, full-time, 50-hour labor or 40-hour laboring weeks, where you stay in the same job for 30 years or something. That, most people in the precariat wouldn't want that. They wouldn't want that. And they don't regard only labor as what is admirable about life. They want to do work and various other things. So it has changed.
Hur är det med tiden?
15 minuter.
So do you think we have one more
question
about the precariat and then
switch to basic income?
Yeah.
Okay.
If then nothing like changes and the precariat doesn't become a class or a force to be reckoned with, where are we heading then?
Well, first of all, I do believe it's becoming a class for itself. I do believe that we're going to see a lot of progressive political developments in the next few years. Okay, I'm an optimist in that regard. If the political centre, the Social Democrats, the moderates, the Conservatives or the Labour Party in Britain, you know, the centre parties, if they continue to ignore the precariat, as they have been, then I can see a very nasty set of developments, which I discuss in the book, The Politics of Inferno. Because I can see this utilitarian politics where the mainstream parties try and compete to sell themselves to the middle class. And therefore they use all clever tricks and adverts and buzzwords and things to appeal to the middle class, their version of the middle class, and tend to ignore the precariat and the underclass below the precariat, then I think we're going to have a very nasty set of developments, because they will play on the fear of the first part of the precariat, the old working class, people who've fallen out of the working class into the precariat, and will play on their fear to get them to support far-right initiative, far-right views and so on. We're seeing that all over Europe. It's very dangerous. Fortunately, we've seen what happened in the past, and therefore we're not going to be stupid enough to allow it to happen. But it could, and we should not be complacent. But I think that the fear that the politicians are using to get support against migrants, against Muslims, against Roma, against some minority or other, now it's youth, lazy youth and things like that. They always want to demonize some group. That won't wash very long. I think it will not fool enough people for them to have success. They are having some success, we know. We know. I'm in Malmö, so I know that the Sweden Democrats got quite a lot of support, and you know, they're an unhealthy minority in my view. But they are reflecting a fear, and we have to address that fear. I don't think migrants should be made the scapegoat, as we call it, of a systemic crisis that we're facing. But that is possible. Now, I think that the energy of the progressive, educated part of the precariat will forge a much better future.
I don't know. One of your solutions to maybe not all of this, but part is basic income. What is basic income, and why do you think we should have it? Okay, well look, I think you have to see the context first. The context is we're facing a situation where millions and millions of people have a life of insecurity and of uncertainty. Uncertainty where they don't know how to calculate the probabilities of an adverse event. We are having a situation too where income inequality is growing dramatically. You know, it's growing faster in Sweden than in any other rich country. It's not appreciated how fast inequality is growing. And you look back at the old welfare state, the Swedish model, which was based on universalism and social insurance of some sort, so that everybody was meant to have a benefit in times of need. Here we have a situation where that old model doesn't work. It could not work because you have a much more flexible labour market, you have much more insecure wages,
You have people with not getting entitlements to various forms of benefits that we've been discussing, and you have a situation where insecurity is growing. Okay? Well, first of all, if you want a good society, you should want all your citizens, to have basic security. And without basic security, people can't be rational. They can't make rational lifetime choices because that insecurity doesn't give them a sense of control, of fundamental being in control. And I think that the arguments for basic income are partly about giving people basic security in which they can be rational, and partly because we do not have a system of redistribution of income at the moment which can moderate the levels of inequality that we're seeing. Those two things are fundamental. But a basic income means that every individual, you, me, anybody else in Sweden, would have as a right of citizenship a small amount of income each month, enough to pay for your food and your rent. Not making you live in luxury, but enough to give you security. It would be a citizenship right. It would be individual, it would be paid in money, and it would be unconditional, except that you have to obey the law, obviously. Now, I think the objections to a basic income that have been thrown at us, and I've been working for a basic income for a long time as a member of Bien, our international network, the objections are you can't afford it. That's the first objection. Well, you can afford to pay huge subsidies to corporations and to banks. You can afford to pay subsidies to many other special interests. And what we're talking about is saying, wait a minute, you don't have to use the money for that. You can use the money for providing a basic income and have supplements for disability, special needs, and special circumstances. It's affordable. There's no question about that. The second objection is that if people had a basic income, they would stop working. They would be lazy. Well, this is an insult to the human condition. 99% of people would actually want to work just as much. And psychological tests have shown that people who have basic security actually work more, not less. And they are more productive when they work, not less. Now this is quite a strong argument for saying, well, if people have basic security, you're going to be more productive, you're going to do more work. And we have to remember as well that not only wage labour should be counted as work. There are many forms of work that we all do, and the Prekariatet have to do a lot more of this sort of work than anybody else in society, which should be compensated as just like any other form of labour, of any work. And in fact, it would help to tilt the balance in society, if you had a basic income, to doing more of the reproductive work that we need to do. More work on the community, more work looking after your neighbours and your relatives and the environment. So that actually it would give people a nudge in the direction of doing the sort of community work that we all should be valuing just as much as pouring tea for a boss, which counts as labour. So the people who talk about the work line are really talking about the labour line, the line that pushes people to thinking that jobs are the only form of work. And the best argument, I feel, for a basic income is that it would allow us to treat our jobs as instrumental while giving us a greater sense of control over our time, our ability to allocate it in ways we think is appropriate to develop ourselves and reproduce our families and our communities and feel a sense of social solidarity. So I think that there are a lot of arguments that are as relevant to our values as as could be imagined, but also more relevant today than at any time in the past because of this open society, flexibility, falling wages reality that we're facing.
Is there a possibility that basic income would just consolidate inequality while giving some people only the chance of living on the edge and not being able to move upwards? And also, would it be a challenge against capitalism, or does it just go along the lines of capitalism?
No, I think it's an emancipatory move. Okay. If we had basic income, you would have a stronger bargaining position against someone who wants to exploit you and oppress you. You would have a stronger ability in extremis to say no. Okay? And that is a very important part of being able to bargain in society. We, at the moment, expect people in the precariat, because they're so desperate, they take any wages, they take any working conditions, and they put up with it. Particularly if you're a migrant or you're desperate and you've got a small child and you're a single mother or something like that. And a basic income would give people a sense of dignity, and they could say no, or they could say yes. They can bargain. And therefore, I think we need to realize that redistribution requires stronger bargaining capacities. And that means that we need collective organizations. We need a revived union movement, but not with the same agenda as it had in the past. It needs a more emancipatory unionism, but we know that people who have security, basic security also tend to join those organizations more. Not out of sheer desperation. If you're too scared, you better not join a union. But if you have basic security, then you will likely to join an organization that is trying to fight for rights and so on. It's interesting that basic income supporters have included some from the ideological right and a lot of us on the ideological left. The ideological right would say, look, we need a basic income. Milton Friedman was a proponent of this view, because only when people have basic security can they be rational and make rational choices. All right? I can respect that view. Okay? They may have an ulterior motive as well, which is to reduce the size of the social state and so on. But that's we can deal with separately. Someone on the left can say, look, we need stronger voice in society. We need stronger bargaining capacity for people who are vulnerable. And therefore, a basic income enables people to have this bargaining strength, the inner strength. And I think that you can use an argument for a basic income for a redistributive, progressive politics. Because you can say, well, how high should the basic income be? Could it be very high, in which case you would be taking a large part of financial capital to be used for the redistribution, or a modest level that gives people just security so that they can be rational? That's up to a political debate. I may favor a higher level than you might, for example. But that can be the second stage of a political debate. What we should all agree on is that everybody should have basic security to build their lives. And without that security, you don't expect people to be socially responsible or productive or nice, because they've been plunged into situations which make them unnice. And it's not their fault. We should not be blaming people or trying to work out if this person is a little bit more to blame than this person over here. That's not right. It's a system that has produced this insecurity that's pervasive across society, and we need a systemic response. And at the moment, we haven't got it. And a basic income is not a panacea, but it should be part of the package of a progressive reform. And that is the argument we're making.